Hello and welcome to Bad Community Advice. This is a show that's all about terrible tips and toxic takeaways. I'm your host. My name is Seth Resler. I am the founder of Community Marketing Revolution. And today we are going to talk about the relationship between a community and an audience. Because this is a thing that a lot of people, especially when they are first engaging with the community space, they're not quite on the right page when it comes to this. So I'm really excited that we're going to dive into this topic. My guest today is the head of community and content at Pinwheel by Audily. She is also the founder of the Earbuds Podcast Collective and a member of the board of governors at the Podcast Academy, somebody who is incredibly well respected in the podcasting space. And she organizes and facilitates podcast meetups, networking events. And I know her because she's a frequent speaker at podcasting conferences all over the nation and even all over the world. Outside of audio, she's a licensed New York City tour guide and runs Nistery, a walking tour company in New York City. I want to welcome Arielle Nissenblatt. Hi, Arielle. How are you?
Hey, I'm great, and I feel welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. Look, and you are one of the luminaries in the podcasting space. I mean, I know
that's very nice of you
for a long time, and just somebody that I think a lot of people follow and really look up to. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this. We're going to get into some bad advice, and I think you've got excellent bad advice because it's the kind of thing that I hear all the time, and it's one of those things that's easy to believe is good advice. And so we're going to dig into why it might not be. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the communities that you are involved with. So let's start with with Pinwheel by Audily. Mm-hmm. What is that and what's the community all about?
Yeah. Pinwheel is a production company under Audily, which is a larger production studio that does a lot in the podcast space. Pinwheel is the chat show division, but then there's also Rococo Punch, which is more of the long-form investigative narrative series. Then there's also Event Liftoff, which facilitates live event tours for bigger shows that kind of can go on the road to meet their fans. And then there's also Pop-Up Kids, which is a kids content studio. So my job within Pinwheel, but also sort of within Audily, is to figure out how all of those work together. So I would say the community members for now are the people that actually are involved in all four of our different arms of the company. So I'm thinking about when a show enters our ecosystem, how can it use all of our four branches, if that makes sense. So that's my background, or that's what I'm doing now within Pinwheel. But my background in community started in 2020 when I took a job as the community manager at SquadCast, which is a remote recording platform that eventually got bought by Descript, which is a text-based editing platform, as well as so much more at this point. So I have worked in community all over the place, sometimes with users directly, sometimes with, maybe we would consider the community members customers. Maybe the community members wouldn't necessarily consider themselves community members. So I think I have a really nuanced view of what a community is and can be. And more importantly, do we as the people who are calling the community, are we the ones who should say that this is the community, or should the community be identifying itself? I think that's a big thing that I like to think about.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is really helpful when we are talking about community, especially for people who are new to community building, is to draw a distinction between the shared mission of the members. Why are the people who are in the community in it? And then the organizational value or the business purpose of the community. Like, why does Audily have a community? Can you use your own community as an example? What are those two, and where do they overlap, and where are they different?
Well, I think actually a better example is this SquadCast community, if that's okay for me to go back in time.
Yeah, go right ahead, please.
Lovely. Well, the first thing I realized when I took this job as community manager was I technically had never had the word community as a job title before in any of my job titles. So I was a little bit intimidated, what is it to be a community manager? And then I realized I facilitate dinners all the time for professional networks. And this was even back in 2020 before the pandemic, obviously. I love gathering people for learning events. And I also love gathering people on the internet in order to talk about shared interests. So I was effectively a community manager before I was technically a community manager. And the first thing that I did when I started at SquadCast was I thought about who the existing community was that considered themselves part of an existing community, and then who was the larger addressable community that I could figure out who they were, what they wanted, and how they wanted to be involved. So I thought about it in terms of this much larger space of who is at any point touching this product, SquadCast, and then I thought about it in terms of who actually wants to be involved in something that might resemble a structured community. I sent out a survey via a weekly newsletter that we were doing, trying to get a sense of who wanted to essentially raise their hand and say, I want to be part of this community. I then gathered those people onto a Zoom call. It was like a couple hundred people who joined this first Zoom call, where I laid out the idea for what I wanted to do with this community. I asked questions, and then afterwards I had them reply to me via email and say how often they wanted to meet, if they wanted to meet at all, where they wanted to meet, what they wanted to discuss, what types of events they wanted, and what kind of perks they wanted. And from there, I started to build the community. And my goal with that was to build a pretty focused, engaged online community that sometimes had IRL events, but then also eventually to find breakout groups within or even outside of that focused group. And I think, when to go back to your original question, I think community is often dictated by the organization when it really should be dictated by the people that will make up that community. And it just kind of takes having focused, individualized conversations with community members to figure out what that means.
You know, I love that because it reiterates something that actually the very first episode we did of this podcast, the bad advice was, if you build it, they will come. And it was that you don't go out and start and build something without talking to anybody first. I love that the first thing you did was sit there and go, what do you guys need? What do you think that this should look like? It's very much an iterative process that you involve. And frankly, that's one of the differences between building a community and building an audience, where, you know, when you have a podcast, you do your podcast and it's completely under control until the moment you hit publish, and then you sort of relinquish it and let everybody get involved with it. This is very different, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people have trouble actually getting people to be in touch with them after they release a podcast episode or a YouTube video or even an Instagram post or even an Instagram live or whatever it is. And I think that is often the problem when that advice, if you build it, they will come. I come across a lot of people. I work with a lot of individual podcasters on a sometimes one-off basis where I'm doing an audit of their show and then telling them what I think could be improved, both from a content perspective and from a marketing perspective. And often they tell me, you know, I started a Facebook group, but like nobody wants to join it. And even the people that have joined it, it felt like pulling teeth to get them there. And every Friday I post a discussion question and nobody wants to have a discussion. And to me, that's so obvious. What's wrong there is that they didn't ask for this. And then you essentially begged them to join this community that they don't want to be a part of. More importantly, for them, they are part of so many other communities already, whether it's podcasts that they already listen to or like school pickup groups or I don't know, religious organizations. Like it could be so many different things that they already are committed to. Why is your podcast? Why is your YouTube channel? Why is whatever it is that you're building audience wise? Why is that something that they must be a part of? And then I like to peel it back a little bit and say, like, do you want them to be a part of this community so that you can say you have a community? For the vanity metric of it all, to say like, oh, my community XYZ? Or are there genuine things that you want to get done in this community? Are you going to hopefully be in conversation with them to figure out what your next season looks like? Are you going to do live events and you need to figure out who your speakers should be for those live events? There's a number of reasons that you should have a community, but one of them is not to say that you have a community just for the sake of it.
Well, that leads right into your bad advice. So let's take a look. Here's your bad advice. Everybody should build a community to grow their audience. And I'm sure that you see this come up all the time in the podcasting world. Talk to me about where you are seeing this bad advice and what that looks like.
This was really big a few years ago, and I'm sure it's big in lots of different social communities still. I'm not seeing it as much because I feel like I did a pretty good job being like, hey, if you build it, they won't come, to go back to that bad advice. And you need to have a reason for building a community. Like I said, I worked in community for remote recording software, but I also work with people all the time who have podcasts and they have heard the advice, I need to build a community in order to grow my show or in order to engage my audience. And my question to them is usually, what do you want that community to do for you, or what do you want to do for that community? And really often the answer is, I was told that I should build a community, and so I'm trying to build a community. There are some communities that are jumping at the seams in order to be started. And what I mean by that is, like, there's a podcast that I listen to called Crime Writers On. It's great. It's Crime Writers On ... So each episode they do a review of a different crime-related podcast or movie or series or TV show or whatever. And the hosts are so dynamic and they're well known in their communities of being crime writers. So when they started the show having these discussions, and they're really good at segmenting the show so that the people that are listening have things that they want to raise their hand and respond to. When they started this, they had a lot of people reaching out to them on social media. And over time, they decided to start a Facebook group. And that Facebook group is very lively, both on discussions of the episode of the week and then also about true crime in general. And that's a community that was essentially corralled. But there are other situations in which you might have a podcast that's like a daily morning commute podcast that is 5 minutes, and people tend to listen to it right when it comes out because you put it out at 6 a.m. and right when they wake up, they press play on it, and then they've moved on with their day. If you are expecting people to then also join you in a Facebook group to discuss the day's news, I think that is going to be a really hard thing to do because there are so many other places for them to discuss the news, and one of those places is in person. And they just might not need to log on to a Facebook group or to a Slack channel to be like, here's what I thought about your analysis of, I don't know, the latest cuts to bills in Congress.
Yeah. One of the things that is implied by you calling out this as bad advice, but it's something that people often don't get right, is that a community and an audience are not the same thing. And I hear those words used interchangeably quite often. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the difference between the two of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think to go back to my original explanation of the SquadCast community, there was the audience essentially of people that have ever touched SquadCast at all. People who have, Googled the phrase how to record your podcast remotely, and maybe they enter their email address into, some sort of form box in order to receive a white paper to learn more about SquadCast or the remote recording landscape. It could be somebody that comes across an interview that one of the founders did, and now they are part of this potential audience that might purchase a subscription to SquadCast. That's the audience. The community, I believe, are people that want to be engaged and either want to give something or want to, I'm not going to say take something, want to learn something from this software or the people that around it that make this software. And so obviously for me in my role there, it manifested as, I wanted to capture the audience to figure out who within the audience wanted to be part of the community. And I think that is also the case for podcasts as well. I'm trying to think of a nice broad example, but I'll make one up. So say you have a podcast about coffee, and if you listen to me on other podcasts, you'll find that I often default to coffee. So apologies, and if you have any other ideas, please feel free to improv, send me a word or two. But
I'm fine with coffee. I just finished my 2 cups this morning, so good.
Nice. Me too. So say you have a podcast about coffee, and you want to reach as many people as possible. Your podcast is about like the business of coffee around the world. And you have advertisers that are like mid-sized chains, and you've got partnerships where you have a code and people can get percentages off of bags of coffee monthly, or you have a coffee subscription or something like that. I think your potential audience is anybody who is interested in the business of coffee, but your community is people that are actively engaging with your podcast, that are interested in learning from you or using your promo codes or giving you answers to some of your questions about coffee production or coffee business. Maybe they want to be a guest on your show. Maybe they in some way want to be involved with either the making of your show or the consumption of your show. But your audience is potentially huge. It's your total addressable market. And that's a lot of people who either like coffee or, depending on how niche your show is, it's people that are interested in the business of it. But again, it's the people that are raising their hands to say, I want to be involved in this, that I think are your community.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that we're saying here is that communities are smaller than audiences, and
sure.
often subsets of audiences, because it is the people who want to get together.
Yeah. And just to clarify, your audience could be people that listen to the show but have zero desire to be a part of this active community that you've created for them. But it also could be, like, again, just because the word community is so, in this context, is so hard to define, you could consider your community anybody who has ever listened to your podcast and, oh, you know, my community this, my community that. But I think that for the purposes of building a community that will serve you and help you serve them in turn, I think it's worth considering that community the people that are actively jumping out of their seats to be a part of this, or to contribute to your mission, or to give you ideas for episodes, or to leave you reviews, or coming to your live shows, or things like that.
Yeah. Having spent a lot of time around podcasters, I know that the two big challenges that they have, and I think this is probably true for content creators in general, is one, they think about how can I grow my audience? And then two, they think about how do I monetize? How do I make money from my audience? And they usually assume that they have to make the money from the audience. And that's one way to do it. And so I think that's why they get into this trap of thinking, oh, I need to have a community to grow the audience. But because communities are smaller than the audience, they're not particularly good at growing audiences. I mean, an audience can help you launch a community, but a community is not a great way to grow a bigger audience.
I mean, I think it can be. I think it's really, really hard to speak in terms that I just think there's so many different types of podcasts that it's hard for us to make any blanket statement like that. Like, for example, if your podcast is about coffee and you are really able to hone this community of people who are part of, maybe the community that you've chosen, the place that you've chosen to be in touch with your community is over a daily text message where you are, no, because then they can't really come back to you. So let's just use Facebook as an example. Say you have a Facebook group for your podcast about coffee, and let's not even say podcast. Let's say your show about coffee. So yes, it's distributed via RSS, but you also put it out on YouTube, and you are also making videos on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Shorts. And so you have people who are discovering you in all sorts of different ways, and they're drawn to the idea of a monthly coffee club where they get a subscription, and in order to be part of that club, they need to purchase the subscription, right? So maybe they love coffee so much, you've done such a great job selling the most recent strain from Colombia, that people really want to take part in this offer that you have, and they join the community that way, and they stick around, right? In that case, they have made a purchase in order to be part of this community, and those are the people that are going to keep coming back if they have a good experience with that bag of coffee for the next round. I also think this is even more applicable in, like, let's say a mental health setting. Maybe you have a podcast about a very specific mental health issue, and you've got people who are listening to the show who are affected by that mental health issue. I think if you have the right advertiser who is talking about the right kind of therapy for that type of mental health issue, you have a really good chance of giving them the right product at the right time that makes them spend some money, and you get a cut of that money. So I do think sometimes the very focused community are the people who are going to buy the product that helps you make some money on this thing. But I think for a lot of shows that are especially broader shows, like let's say a show about two best friends getting together and having conversations about movies, you're going to talk about movies, but you're also probably going to talk about like everything related to that movie. So sometimes you'll discuss sleeping and sleep habits. And so a mattress company is going to be a good potential sponsor for you. In which case, it doesn't really matter week to week who is listening and if they love the specific thing that you talk about, or everybody needs to sleep. So a mattress in that case is going to be good for your overall audience, not just the specific community who loves your movie podcast week after week.
To your point, I think community can actually help with that second issue that a lot of podcasters, which is the revenue piece, almost more than the audience piece, because it does open up new streams of revenue. I was struck last year when I was at Podcast Movement. There was a session by a woman named Jillian Teets, who hosts the Sober Powered podcast. And her session was all about how she generates revenue and how her podcast enabled her to leave her day job. And I was struck by this graph that she put up. I took a photo of it and I asked her if I could use it in my presentation the next day, where she showed a pie graph of where her revenue was coming from. And what struck me is that about a third of her revenue was coming from advertising, but almost half was coming from a community that she had built on Circle. And it makes a lot of sense, particularly for
that's an interest-specific podcast. Yeah.
Yes. So she, her community is about helping people who are, getting sober and staying sober. And it makes sense. That's absolutely something that would make you would want to build a community.
I mean, that's the type of show that is really pulling at the heartstrings of people. That is like the definition of a community, is people who are becoming sober or are on their sobriety journey in some way. And I think that a community there is really important, both for the purposes of helping you stay on track, but then also, for Jillian herself, like making sure that she's got people who are bought into this message and she can offer them genuinely great products and services that will help specifically them at their stage.
Yeah. And compare that to a show like Joe Rogan, where the audience obviously is massive.
Anything. Yeah.
Right? But the question then becomes, are the people who listen to the Joe Rogan show, do they have enough in common? Are they working towards a common mission or goal in the same way that when you start getting into those niche audiences are? I don't know that a community makes sense for Joe Rogan. I think the audience path is what makes sense.
Well, I think with Joe Rogan, he has carved out his own. With Joe Rogan, the fans have carved out their own community, and it's more of a fan community than anything else. It's not, maybe it's like a We Love Joe Rogan community. Who knows? I'm sure that those exist. But the point is that the audience is so big that there are probably so many niche communities. I mean, there's a podcast called, there was a podcast years ago called The Morning Toast. I think it still exists to a certain extent, but it was millennial women every morning. It was essentially a radio show where these two sisters kind of like went through pop culture news and whatever else was going on in their lives. And people loved them so much that they started first a Morning Toast Facebook group, but then within that, Democrat morning toasters, yoga morning toasters, like any sort of niche you can think of, New York City morning toasters. And then those were communities in and of themselves that no longer discussed the podcast, but used the podcast as a way to meet people to talk about whatever it was that their interest was. And I thought that that is just such a good example of how, first of all, how podcasts can create such close-knit friends or even just people interested in the same things.
Yeah. This speaks to a point that the way we think about size is different when it comes to audience and community. With audience, you just want as big as possible, and you want everybody in, and you're not necessarily doing ID checks at the door to make sure that they're all the right people. With communities, the value comes not from the size, but from the quality of the
engagement.
And the interaction, what's happening between the people who are members of the community. And so there's a couple of things there. One, smaller is sometimes quite a lot better because people get more interaction out of there, but it also means that you want the right people in the room who are going to be able to offer quality interactions and quality relationships with other people. And part of that is keeping the wrong people out of the room in order to make a safe space where people can connect with each other. And that's one of the things that I find when dealing with people who have worked in content creation their whole lives. They're just like, bigger is always better. I always want more people. To your point, at a certain point, when it gets bigger, you start to see subgroups pop up.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen this in Podcast Movement, which is a podcasting conference. Get around 3,000 people every year. So even then, we're not talking millions. And you have started to see subgroups pop up. Oh, the podcast editors want to hang out here, or the women who are podcasting want to hang out here, or podcasters of color, or various things. And that's because the quality of the relationships gets better when it niches down like that, right?
Yeah. And everybody, I mean, I wish I knew more of the sociology behind community building and why humans flock together and things like that. And maybe that's like a next step for me. And maybe you know a little bit about this, but yeah, people love to connect with people that they have things in common with. And it's essentially the job of a community manager to figure out what those things are, and then not to be super capitalistic about it, to figure out how to serve those people, and maybe exploit is not the right word, but to figure out what they need in order to serve them those things. And sometimes those things are products and services.
Yeah.
Tough comment.
Well, it can be that, but it can also be the community itself could be the product.
Of course.
You can charge people for, again, come back to Podcast Movement, they charge for tickets.
Are you going, by the way?
Come. This is going to be the first year I'm going to miss it. I'm bummed.
Sad.
We're recording this right before it comes out. This we'll probably publish this episode afterwards, but this is going to be the first year.
It was really fun.
Yeah. you tell me about all the things that I missed. So
yeah, I should make some predictions.
But yeah, so one of the other things that I think you bring up here is that when we are looking to build an audience, essentially we're creating content, and that content creates an audience. When you build a community, you're creating a space and allowing people to gather in that space. Can you talk about some of the things that you have found in building the spaces that you built over the years?
Yeah. So I think, and maybe I've already made this point, but I just want to be super clear that there's communities that you actively build, and then there's communities that identify themselves. And sometimes those communities might gather on their own. But I think in this situation, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about the ones that I am actively building, that I, as the community manager, am saying, this is the sanctioned community.
Yeah, so it's funny because I think of, communities around content. For example, I remember when Lost was a big television show. And you saw all these online forums pop up that the producers of Lost had nothing to do. It was just people who wanted to trade theories about what was going on the island. I don't know that Taylor Swift actually is setting up all of the Swiftie communities.
I actually think that she just guested on her first podcast ever this week. And have you listened to it?
I have not. Have you?
So I was not going to. I don't listen to New Heights with Travis Kelce and Jason Kelce, but the number of people that posted on Instagram screenshots or just like their TV because they live streamed the conversation between where Taylor was a guest on her first podcast, New Heights. I mean, I was like, I feel like as a student of this industry, the podcast space, and now the emerging video podcast universe, I feel like I must take this in. So I've been listening, and it's very interesting to figure out how she relates to her community, because we don't often hear her speak in long form like this. So you hear her talking about her relationship with the fans. You hear her making allusions to her things that she's done for the fans. And you do hear that she's aware of a lot of different groups that have formed in support of her, or in response to her just being a pop culture icon. I would not be surprised if there are like almost sanctioned fan groups or communities, meaning like that have some sort of association with her I don't know, management, but I don't think she herself, of course, is like in charge in any real capacity of like the Taylor Swift community. That being said, I highly recommend you watch/listen to this interview, just because it's a masterclass in promoting something, because of course she also announced she announced the drop of her latest album. And I am not even somebody I'm not a Swiftie. I barely know any of her discography, but you have to reckon with the fact that she's a cultural phenomenon.
She really is. I mean, it is really impressive. I mean, I like some of her songs. I'm not a Swiftie either, but
Me too.
from a marketing standpoint and an organizational standpoint, what she has built and put together is amazing.
Yeah.
But let's talk to content creators who are not Taylor Swift and do not have people who are forming their own communities around their content, but are thinking about building a space. What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is I'm very proud of myself from 2020 for doing this, and I still think that this is what should be done first, is asking the community what they want and trying to figure out how they group themselves, and then from there determining what you can do to further facilitate those connections. Like I did for SquadCast, where I used our existing resources. We had a list of however many hundreds of thousands of people that had ever touched SquadCast and given us their email address. We had a weekly, or I think at that point it was like a monthly email correspondence with them. So I segmented that into people that were active users, and I sent an email, and that was still a couple 100,000 people. And I, within that email, gave a bunch of really great resources about the podcast industry, about interview prep, about like news in the podcast space, events that were going on. And then somewhere in the middle of that, I put, I am the new community manager here at SquadCast, and I would love to learn about how you use the product. And if you'd like to be part of this community that we're building, if you're interested, come to this event that we're doing. And it's going to be a town hall where I ask questions, you answer. Sometimes if you'd like to pop on stage and really give your perspective testimonial, I would love that. Or you can just feel free to listen and learn. And so I then had a couple hundred people who jumped into that. And from there, I was able to determine that most people wanted to be on a Slack channel. Most people wanted monthly online events and quarterly-ish meetups in different cities throughout the U.S. Of course, we couldn't be everywhere at once, but we had presence in New York and in San Francisco, and that's where a lot of podcasters happen to be. And then they also wanted... I created a system in which if they gave feedback consistently over months and months, we could give them different swag items, merchandise that showed off their commitment to the community. So this is all stuff that I was able to determine by first asking what they wanted, how they use the product, and ultimately what was in it for them.
That's so important, getting those feedback loops set up right from the beginning and getting that input. I'm curious, what surprised you most? What do you think, if you had built it, without asking those questions first, what would you have done wrong, and what are you glad that you got input on?
That's a fun question. I mean, I did actually, in addition to doing the Slack channel, which happened to be the place where most things happen, I did make 2 Facebook groups. I made one that was called remote recording, like remote recorders. I forget the actual name of it, but I think it was like This Remote Life. Actually, I don't forget the name of it. This Remote Life, a take on This American Life. This Remote Life was supposed to be a community for people that record their podcast remotely. And this was 2020, like I said, so everyone was recording their podcast remotely, but only some people knew to like search remote recording community groups. So I wanted to capture people there who were just remote recording in general, whether they use SquadCast or not. So even if they were using Iris.fm or Boomcaster or Riverside or Zoom or Google Meets or whatever, they were welcome to join this in order to have discussions generally about what they were experiencing, best practices, things like that. And then I also made a Facebook group called Squadcasters, podcasters, something like that, which was specific to people who were using SquadCast. So theoretically, when they applied to join, I checked their email address alongside our community of users. And that was meant to be look, I had this issue, not necessarily a support channel, but like, hey, I have this issue. Has anybody solved it? And then hopefully the community would chime in, or people reaching out and saying, or even saying like, I have this person coming up on my podcast. They're a vet of large animals. What questions do you have for large animal vets? So that could be something that happened within this Facebook group. And it took off a bit, but it never really became self-sustaining. And when I went on a vacation and didn't schedule posts, nothing happened. So I essentially then pivoted and focused all my attention on the Slack community, where people really like double, triple opted in to be part of that, because it takes a lot of effort to get on Slack.
Yeah. Can we point out something too, just to make it clear that it's okay to try things and have them not work?
Oh, I love a failure.
Well, good. I'm very good at it.
I am so good at it. And I mean, that manifests in so many different ways. First of all, yeah, try a community, shut it down. If no one cares, you can probably shut it down without telling anyone. But that also goes down to, like, sometimes I'll post something on LinkedIn and it doesn't get a lot of likes. So I delete it and retry it with like different keywords or different call to action, and it does better. And I don't care who sees that. Yeah. And I think that that's a big part of it, is like you have to not care, because the internet is the internet, whatever.
All right, last question. I want you to make a prediction. 5 years from now, what do you think we're going to be talking about when it comes to community?
This is already starting, but 5 years from now, I think this is really going to be the case, where people are discovering content by way of many different entry points. There's podcasts, of course. There's YouTube videos. There's TikTok short form. There's YouTube Shorts short form. There's, Instagram lives. There's Instagram posts. There's infographics that you can post on LinkedIn, whatever. So say you discover my podcast say you discover my community by way of my podcast, which is an hour long about coffee. And say you discover my community about coffee by way of 30-second sound bites on TikTok. I think that those two people are very different people. The people who are discovering me by way of TikTok and the people who are discovering me by way of long form interview. You have different habits when it comes to media consumption. So I think in 5 years, communities are going to be better at honing who those people are and what they need specifically from communities. I don't think that's happening nowadays. I don't think that once people get into the funnel, we're really thinking about what their individual needs are, but I think we need to if we want to keep them and if we want to continue serving them. Yeah. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. Maybe it means like community platforms have better segmentation. Maybe it means community platforms are going to give us AI suggestions for what to post to this group of people and to this group of people. But I think that it's going to become more segmented even within our communities.
Yeah. In other words, have more than one front door that people can kind of come in and knowing and understanding where people are coming from and personalizing their onboarding and even
the front door. The front door, but then also the experience within the door.
Yeah. So what happens so really segmenting and personalizing that. Yeah. I can see it even beyond just the form that the content takes, whether it's TikTok or a podcast, but even, I don't know, I'm still in Buffy the Vampire Slayer Facebook groups for some reason. And I can see some people who are coming into that group because there's going to be a reboot of the show. Right. Versus people who were in there because they're old people like me who watched it on television show the first time around. So, well, Arielle, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your bad advice. You are welcome back anytime. Look, the Earbuds Podcast Collective, people can find at earbuds.audio. Tell us a little bit about that. Who is that for?
That's for people who love listening to podcasts, as well as people who want to get their own podcast promoted. It's a podcast recommendation newsletter that I started in 2017. It goes out every Sunday. I've never missed a week. And it has, at this point, hundreds and hundreds of lists on topics of all sorts of different, every topic you can imagine. I have lists of 5 podcast episodes on a theme, and each week is curated by a different person, and anyone can curate a list. So if you have a podcast yourself, you're welcome to reach out and submit a curation. Anyone can do it. The form to curate is right on my website. You don't have to get special permission to do so. And if you just are looking for podcasts to listen to, if you subscribe, you'll get an email every Sunday, or you can check out the back catalog of hundreds and hundreds of lists.
All right. Well, Arielle Nissenblatt, please say hello to everybody at Podcast Movement for me this year.
Do.
I'm so sorry that I'm not going to be there. But thank you for joining us and sharing your bad advice.
Thanks for having me.